We've all seen the victory feasts in movies, the drinking horns, the celebration, the gold piled high. But there's a story that starts after the fires die down, one that isn't told. It's the story of the noble women, the queens, the princesses, the daughters of chieftains whose halls have just been conquered. Their fate was not a footnote. It was a strategy. This is not a story of romance or rescue. This is about what happened when the cheering stopped and the real price of defeat was paid. We will look at 7 of these fates. If you value documented history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual using sources like the Annals of Alter and the Lexa Saga. Now back to the story. Number 1, the Women of Ire 821, the Irish Coast. The entry in the Annals of Alter is stark, written with the cold efficiency of a ledger. For the year 821, it reads, Etir was plundered by the heathens, and they carried off a great number of women into captivity. Posit, today known as Howth, was a prominent settlement on a peninsula guarding the northern approach to Dublin Bay. It was a strategic prize. The raid wasn't random. It was a targeted acquisition of resources. And in the 9th century, one of the most valuable resources was people. These captured women, stripped of their names and lineage in a single brutal act, were reclassified under Norse law as thralls. This was the lowest rank in society, a status of property, not personhood. Their journey into servitude began on the decks of a longship, crammed together as human cargo. The voyage itself was a filter. Only the resilient survived the North Atlantic crossing. Their destination was likely the burgeoning Viking port of Dublin, what would become Dublin, one of the largest slave markets in Western Europe. There they would be sorted, valued, and sold. A healthy young woman could fetch between 12 and 20 ounces of silver, the equivalent of a small farmstead's annual output. They were purchased by Norse settlers in Ireland, or shipped further to markets in Hedeby in Denmark, Birka in Sweden, or even trafficked along the river routes of the Rus into the vast slave economies of the Byzantine Empire and the Abbasid Caliphate. Their skills in weaving or medicine, once marks of high status, now just increase their price tag. The annals don't mention a single name. They were a collective, a number and an entry. Their individual lives and stories were deliberately erased and absorbed into the economic engine of the Viking world. Confiscated, inventoried, silenced. Number 2, Melora Merkjarten, mid-10th century, Ireland to Iceland. The Icelandic Laxus saga, written 2 centuries after the events, gives a name to one of these captives. Melora was the daughter of an Irish king, Merkjarten. Around the year 956, her world was shattered by a Viking raid. She was captured, shipped to Norway, and put up for sale in a bustling market. She was seen by Hoskold Dalakolen, a wealthy Icelandic chieftain, on a trading voyage authorized by King Hon of Norway. Hoskold was struck by her beauty and bearing, asking the merchant her name. The merchant, a Rus trader named Gilly, claimed not to know it. Hoskold paid 3 marks of silver for her, an enormous sum. A single mark of silver was 8 ounces, meaning he paid 24 ounces of pure silver, 3 times the price of a prime milk cow. He bought her silence as well, for the entire journey back to Iceland, and for years after, Melora refused to speak. She lived in his hall as a concubine, bearing him a son they named Olaf. Everyone, including Hoskold, believed she was a mute. This was her armor, a desperate strategy to retain some fragment of her inner self in a world where she was otherwise powerless. The truth only came out by accident. One day, Hoskold was walking by a stream near his farm and overheard Melora speaking to their young son. She was teaching him her native language, Gaelic. The saga records her words to the boy that his grandfather was Merkjarten, king of the Irish. Hoskold confronted her, and the full story of her royal birth was revealed. Her status improved slightly within the household, but she was never freed. She remained in Iceland, a captive princess whose identity was discovered by chance. Her son, Olaf, would grow up to be a powerful chieftain known as Olaf the Peacock for his splendid dress. He eventually sailed to Ireland with a shipload of goods, met his grandfather, King Merkjarten, and was formally acknowledged as Irish royalty. But Melora never saw her home again. She died in Iceland, thousands of miles from the kingdom She was born to inherit. Bought, hidden, revealed. Number 3, the Abbeys of Coldingham, 870, the coast of Northumbria, Scotland. In the autumn of 870, the great heathen army, which had terrorized England for 5 years, turned its attention north. The force was commanded by the infamous sons of Ragnar Lothbrok, including Ivar the Boneless and Halfdan. They marched on the monastery at Coldingham, a double monastery of both monks and nuns located on a wind-swept cliff overlooking the North Sea. The abbess, a woman known to us from later chronicles as Eba the Younger, knew exactly what was coming. Viking raids on religious houses were notorious not just for plunder and murder, but for the systematic rape of the women inside. For Eba and her nuns, this was a fate worse than death, a violation that in their deeply religious worldview tainted the soul itself. As the Viking army approached, Eba gathered her community in the chapter house. The account recorded by the 13th century chronicler Matthew Paris in his Florus Historiarum is unflinching. She took a razor and, in front of all her sisters, sliced off her own nose and upper lip, rendering her face a bloody mask. She then commanded the other nuns to do the same. Make yourselves a spectacle of horror to the lust of the barbarians. One by one, they followed her example. When the Vikings finally smashed through the monastery's defenses and burst into the chapter house, they were not met with trembling victims, but with a silent assembly of intentionally disfigured women. The invaders, cheated of their prize and enraged by this act of defiance, showed no mercy. They barred the doors, piled timber against the stone walls, and set the entire building ablaze. The abbess and her entire community were burned alive. Their final choice was not between life and death, but between two different kinds of death. They chose the fire. Their bones, mixed with the ash and charcoal of their home, became one with the cliffside soil, burned, buried, unbroken. If you value this kind of deep dive into documented history, hit that subscribe button. It's the single best way to keep this channel going. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from. This script relies on sources like the Chronicle of Matthew Paris and archaeological findings from Viking-era settlements. Now back to the history. Number 4, the Women of Canterbury. 10 to 11, the Heart of Kent, England. For nearly 3 years, a large Danish army under command of Thor the Tall had been ravaging southern England. King Ethelred the Unready's policy of paying ever larger sums of Danegeld had failed. It only encouraged more attacks. In September 1011, Thor's forces laid siege to Canterbury, the ecclesiastical capital of England. For 20 days, the city held out. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle tells us the defense was fierce, but the city was ultimately betrayed from within by a man named Elfar, whose life had previously been saved by Archbishop Alfege. The Vikings poured through these gates. The Chronicle paints a grim picture. They took Archbishop Elia, Elfcafu, the King's Reeve, Leopren Abbeys of St. Milders and Godwin, Bishop of Rochester. They captured the entire leadership of the city, both secular and religious. They then systematically sacked the great cathedral, Christ Church, and put most of the population to the sword. But the noble women, like Elfcafu and Abbeys Leopren, were not killed. They were far too valuable. They became hostages, bargaining chips in a brutal negotiation. The army held them captive for months. Archbishop Elia refused to allow a ransom to be paid for him, famously declaring that he would not have his freedom bought with the church's money. In April 1012, at a drunken feast in Greenwich, the frustrated Vikings pelted him with animal bones before one of them finally finished him with an axe blow to the head. He was martyred. The fate of the women was quieter, but no less terrifying. They were part of the price of peace. The following year, a staggering 48,000 silver was paid to Thor's army to make them leave. The freedom of these high-status women was almost certainly part of that transaction. Their lives calculated as a line item in a national ransom payment. They were pawns in the highest stakes game of their time. Their survival depended on the weight of silver and the whims of their captors. Captured, ransomed, erased. Number 5, the captives of Dumbarton Rock. 870, the kingdom of Strathclyde, Scotland. While Halfdan and Ivar's army burned monasteries in the east, another Viking force was attacking from the west. The leaders were Olaf the White, the Norse king of Dublin, and his ally Ivar. Their target was Alt-Clut, the Rock of the Clyde, known today as Dumbarton Rock. This near-impregnable volcanic plug was the capital of the ancient kingdom of Strathclyde. For 4 months, the fortress held out against a brutal siege. The attackers couldn't scale the rock. Instead, they surrounded it, cutting off its water supply. The annals of Alta record that after 120 days, the well inside the fortress ran dry. The defenders, dying of thirst, finally surrendered. What followed was one of the single largest slave events of the Viking Age in Britain. Olaf and Ivar spent the winter on the Clyde, gathering their plunder. In 871, a fleet of 200 ships sailed back to Dublin, their holds packed with treasure and human captives. The annals state they brought back a great booty in people, Angles, Britons, and Picts. The king of Strathclyde, Arthal, was among the captives. His wife and the other noble women of the court were now slaves. Arthal himself was later killed in Dublin at Olaf's instigation. For the women, their rank meant nothing. They were now part of a massive human cargo. Their value assessed at the Dublin slave market. Their story demonstrates the scale and organization of Viking slaving. This wasn't a byproduct of a raid. It was the primary objective. Siege, thirsted, shipped. Number 6. The Wives of Settlers, late 9th century Iceland. The Icelandic Landnámabók, or Book of Settlements, details how the island was colonized. It's often portrayed as a story of brave explorers seeking freedom. But the book also contains cold evidence of how this new society was built. It was built with stolen women. The saga of Ingemund the Old, a powerful chieftain from Norway, is one such case. Before settling Iceland, his men, including his foster brothers, launched raids on Ireland. The Landnámabók states plainly that they returned with captives. One of these was an Irish noblewoman named Refgard. She was taken by a Viking named Eyvindr Sorkver and forced to be his wife in the new harsh land of Iceland. Another chieftain, Kettle the Foolish, is recorded as having settled in Kirkjubæur, but the book notes that because he was a Christian, no heathens would live there. His descendants, however, married into families whose matriarchs were captured Irish women. Genetic evidence supports these tales. Modern DNA studies show that while the majority of male Icelandic settlers had Norse paternal ancestry, up to 63% of the original female settlers had maternal ancestry from Ireland and Scotland. The math is brutal. For every chieftain who established a farm, there were often women who had been taken by force from their homelands to become unwilling wives and mothers. They were the foundation of a new nation, a foundation laid in violence. Plundered, transported, replanted. Number 7. The Lady of the Oseberg Ship, 834. Vestfold, Norway. In 1904, archaeologists excavating a large burial mound near the Oslo fjord in Norway uncovered the single most spectacular Viking artifact ever found, the Oseberg Ship, perfectly preserved in blue clay. The 21-meter-long oak vessel was breathtakingly ornate, its prow carved into the shape of a coiled serpent. Inside was a burial chamber fit for royalty, dated by dendrochronology to the summer of 834. It was filled with treasures, a richly decorated wooden cart, 3 ceremonial sledges, beds, chests, tapestries, and the remains of 15 horses and 4 dogs. In the burial chamber lay the skeletons of 2 women. One was elderly, between 70 and 80 years old. Her bones showed she suffered from advanced cancer, and she was likely a woman of immense power, perhaps a queen or a priestess. For decades, it was assumed the second woman, who was younger, around 50, was her high-ranking servant or companion, who chose to follow her mistress into the afterlife. But modern science tells a potentially much darker story. Analysis of the younger woman's mitochondrial DNA revealed a genetic marker, haplogroup U7, which is extremely rare in Scandinavia. It is most commonly found in the regions around the Black Sea and Iran. This physical evidence strongly suggests she was a foreigner brought to Norway from far away. Her diet, analyzed through bone isotopes, also showed a sudden shift late in life to a high-protein diet typical of the Norwegian elite, indicating she hadn't always lived there. The likely scenario is chilling. She may have been a noble woman from the East, captured in a raid, and forced into servitude in the household of the powerful Osberg queen. Her life in Norway was one of privilege compared to a field for all, but she was property nonetheless. When her mistress died, her life was forfeit. She was sacrificed, perhaps willingly as part of the ritual, or perhaps not, to serve in death as she had in life. The lavish burial was not for her. It was a reflection of her owner's status. Her presence in that magnificent tomb is not a story of loyalty, but the ultimate act of possession, bound, buried, forgotten. The stories don't end there. In 2009, workers building a relief road for the 2012 Olympic Games in Dorset, England, uncovered a mass grave on Ridgeway Hill. There was a pit containing the skeletons of 54 young men, all executed around the year 1000. The bodies had been thrown in, but the 51 skulls were piled separately to one side. Analysis of chemical isotopes in their teeth, which lock in the geology of where a person grew up, proved they were all from Scandinavia, one from north of the Arctic Circle. They were a Viking war band captured and systematically executed by the local Anglo-Saxons. It was a brutal act of local resistance. But this dramatic find of Viking men being killed is an anomaly in the written record. The chronicles of the time, from the annals of Alter to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, are filled with countless entries that speak not of captured Viking men, but of captured local women. For every Viking crew that met its end on a foreign shore, dozens of ships returned home, their holds filled with human plunder. These women were the invisible currency of the Viking age, the true spoils of war, their fates unrecorded, their names lost. Their value was calculated in silver, but their loss was absolute.